Hello, I'm Dale.
And I'm Sean.
We are going to do a basic collection view that is a collection of hello worlds. To begin, we're going to the main storyboard where we are going to add a collection view to our user interface. I searched for collection view inside of the object library, dragging it into the view controller, and now I'm going to set some constraints on it. I'm going to make it so that it sits a zero distance from the top layout guide, which would just be below the status bar, and on the other three sides I'm going to pin it to the super view. So leading space to super view, reselect it, pin trailing space to super view, reselect it, and pin bottom space to super view. In doing so, some deltas have been created because I didn't exactly drag and drop it perfectly in place. So on the horizontal space, we're going to set that -10 to 0. On the vertical space, that was the pin to the bottom, I'm going to set that to 0. And on the horizontal space again, on the other side, we're going to set that to 0. And if I select the collection view and then go to the icon here with the triangle, which if you hover says resolve auto layout issues, it's really not an issue. We are just simply saying update the frames so that it reflects the changes that we made. So we now have a collection view inside of our view for our view controller, and you'll notice with the ruler selected, these are various properties that can be set on the collection view. The one that I am first interested in is the cell size. Right now the cells are set to be 50 points by 50 points. That's reflected inside of this collection view cell, which is our reusable cell, which we will DQ reusable cell to get and make modifications to for each cell that we put in the collection view. We can change the size of the cell by dragging its corners. We cannot change the size of the cell by selecting the cell and modifying its height and width in the ruler, in the size inspector. But we can select the collection view itself and change that cell size by setting the height and width here. So I'm going to say 120 by 120 is going to be my cell size for now, and that was reflected inside of our collection view cell. Now this cell that is going to be our reusable cell needs to have an identifier, a reuse identifier. I'm simply going to call it cell. If you had multiple cells, which you could actually drag multiple and have different designs for your cells out here, you'd probably want to have a more creative naming scheme to differentiate between them, but I'm going to take that one and just delete it out because we're going to be working with the one that we have. So the contents of this cell right now are nothing. It's just an empty UI view of type UI collection view cell.
Well, we could go up to the identity inspector in the top right, one over, and notice the custom class UI collection view cell.
And I did it down here as well. In the library, it's a UI collection view cell. So nothing in it. I need to add something. I said I'm going to do a collection of hello worlds. A good place to put a hello world is a label. So I find a label and I drag it into my cell and drop it. And I'm going to set the layout constraints so that it centers the label horizontally and vertically. I'm going to control-click drag from it on the diagonal, hold the Shift key down, and center horizontally and vertically, leave up the Shift key and click outside. I notice though I kind of have a problem. I have a label of black text, transparent background on a cell that's transparent that's against a black collection view. So I need to do something so I can see that text. What I'm going to choose to do is select the cell and set its background color to white. And now our label is visible. Our cells will be displayed 120 by 120, patterned vertically and horizontally across my collection view, which is black, so there'll be black space between the cells. So I'm going to now go to the view controller and implement the code to allow the collection view to have my collection of hello worlds. The collection view, if you've worked with it before, is a lot like a table view. It has a delegate and a data source. So we're going to implement those. First, we're going to take our view controller class and say that we are going to implement the UI collection view delegate and the UI collection view data source on it. And by saying we're going to implement these protocols, we are saying that we need to implement certain methods that the protocols define. The first one, and this is literally the same as table view, is number of sections, but rather than number of sections in table view, it's number of sections in collection view. For this example right now, we are going to have one section. A section is just that. It is a group of cells, and each section would have its own group of cells. And a section can have a header and a footer, so you can have a section with a header and a footer and a set of cells, and then another header and footer with a set of cells in it.
You could almost say it's a collection of cells.
Because it's a collection view.
Ah.
There you go. So the next method I'm going to implement, and the remaining methods I'm going to implement, are going to be based on collection view. So I can just start typing collection view, and I get the collection view methods. The one I need is number of items in section. And it is literally that, number of items in section. So I have one section, and I've decided that I'm going to put 100 hello worlds in that section, so I'm going to just simply statically return 100. And finally, I need to create cells. So I'm going to again begin typing collection view, and I'm looking for not view for supplementary element of kind, that would deal with headers and footers, but we need cell for item at index path. So we need to create cells. We created a reusable cell, or defined a reusable cell within Interface Builder, and that's the one that we want to work with. So we're going to say let cell, just a convenient constant name that we want to put the cell in. And the DQ reusable cell with reuse identifier is a method off of our collection view object. This method receives a collection view object as its first parameter, so that's available to us. So we're going to say collection view dot DQ reusable cell with reuse identifier. Our identifier was cell. We defined that here in the storyboard when we selected the cell right up here, collection reusable view identifier cell. That's where that comes from. And we need an index path. Sometimes you define different reusable cells for different places, different sections. We have one section, we don't really care about the index path, so I'm simply going to pass the index path along that was passed in, but we really only have one cell, so it's not going to make any difference to us. Now, the DQ reusable cell with reuse identifier gives me an any object, because it these DQ methods don't know what our particular classes are. In fact, we could have done a custom class for this cell, so it's not like it can know it's just, you know, a one particular type.
Right.
So it's our job when we get it, and we get an any object, to cast it into the object that it is. So we're going to do a force cast that's as exclamation point, and it is a UI collection view cell. And our cell has a label in it. And now I'm thinking, how the heck do I get to that label? Well, I haven't done anything to enable that yet. really. Actually, there's some code methods where you get all the children and kind of find it. But here is a particularly easy way without doing a custom class to get to the label. We're going to go into Interface Builder, select the label, and notice that there is an item here called tag. We are going to set the tag to have a number. I'm going to choose for it to be 1. Notice in the pop-up there it says an integer that you can use to identify view objects in your application. So we're going to use that 1 to identify it. So now I can get to the label by using that tag. And so I'm going to say let label equal cell dot, and what is the method that I need? It is view with tag. And the tag is a 1. Now, like our DQ reusable cell, our view with tag is giving us an any object simply because it doesn't really know what view type that is being retrieved on that tag. And so we're going to say, well, let's cast that as a UI label. Now that we have our label, we can set the text in it. So label.text equals hello, a little bit of an extra there, hello world. And then my cell's ready to go, so I could return it. Now I'm thinking hello worlds and all the cells are pretty cool, and there's something else going on here. Did I accidentally do an extra parenthesis, or little parentheses there? I'd like with each hello world to put its position. I would like to use the index path and find out the numbers that go with it, because that's probably going to be something I need later on when I'm doing collections to know which element in the collection I'm at. So we are provided with an index path, and the index path has a set of properties, and if I just type index path, we can look at them. Index path dot, and the one I'm interested in is item. It's an integer that tells me which item. It's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we were dealing with a table view, we'd be dealing with rows.
Or sections.
Or sections. But here we're dealing with items. So what I'm going to do down in my hello world is put a slash parenthesis, and then inside the parentheses, I'm going to put index path dot item. So I'm still missing something. I implemented the methods for this being my delegate and data source for my collection view, but I didn't tell the collection view that this view controller is my delegate and data source. And I can do that in code, or I can go to the storyboard and I can control-click drag from, not from the cell, that makes no sense, from the collection view up to the view controller. And when I leave off on that, I can say delegate, and then I do it one more time, control-click drag up. And you know, my trackpad is having fun there, and then I can say data source. And if I control-click here, we can see that our collection view has set that view controller as the data source and delegate. If we were to do this in code, we would have to create an IB outlet, so we'd know what the collection view is, and then up here in view did load, we'd say collection view dot data source equals self, collection view dot delegate equals self. Believe we're ready. You want to give it a try?
Yep, build and run it.
So here we are, set of hello worlds. You'll notice that there's a big black column in the middle, and the reason for this is the collection view will take our cells, which right now happen to be 120 by 120, and attempt to lay them out and fit them in using our spacing parameters that were set for the collection view, and it simply can't get a third column in here. If we were to make the cells in our collection view smaller, then we could actually get more of them on the display, and it probably wouldn't look like this. So I'm going to go back to the storyboard, select the cell, and I could drag its corner, or I could select the collection view and go to the cell size, and I'm going to set the cell size to 110 by 110.
That's probably going to make the label really tight, so how about we make that label a little bit smaller?
So I'm going to select the label, and I am going to choose to have a font size of 14 instead. And these dotted lines and this kind of orange-yellow line indicates to us that that isn't exactly how it's going to look. So we're going to do an update frames. There we go. That's how it's going to look. If we run this now, we do get our third column in there. It looks a little more normal. These spaces that occur in between here have a minimum amount of spacing, but there isn't a maximum. So we can say that there has to be at least this much spacing between the cells. The wider columns there are because, well, it's going to distribute the extra space to give us at least that minimum, but there's some left over, so it's going to go evenly into those columns. Also, we don't have any spacing around the edges, so let's see if we can modify this a little bit just to see how this can be improved maybe. So I'm going to select the collection view, go to the ruler, the size inspector, and first I'm going to do insets. That's going to put space around the sides. So at the top, we're going to add 5. Notice that came down here in Interface Builder. I'm going to come in from the left. Notice that moved it over. I'm going to do 5 there. I'm not going to see this changing because there's nothing against the bottom and the right, but this will ensure that there's an inset of 5 on the bottom and right. And instead of a minimum spacing of 10 between the cells, I'm going to do a minimum spacing of 5 between them. Also, while we're here, let's notice that we can change the direction of the scroll from vertical to horizontal. And if I run this after those changes, we'll see that we now have some space around the edges. And at the bottom, we don't on the right because there are items to scroll to there, but now I'm scrolling horizontally. There are my 100 hello worlds. I can also paginate this. So if I go back to the storyboard, select the collection view, I can enable paging. Scrolling has to be turned on for paging to work. If you turn scrolling off, you can't move through the items. And now, when I drag a little bit, it jumps to the next page. If you don't drag enough, it snaps back. If you drag enough, it goes to the next page.
So is that the only way to add a cell, essentially, to your collection view?
So, no. And this isn't just true of collection views. This would be kind of any entity, so table view cells, etc., can be created as nib files. And we can load those nib files and use them as our reusable cell. So let's actually do that so we can see how that works as an alternative. I'm going to go to the project and say File, New, File, and go to User Interface and say that, well, I guess I could use empty, couldn't I?
Yeah.
As a starting point. So I'm going to say empty. And I am going to call this my HW cell. So I have nothing in front of me at the moment, just an empty nib file. And we call them nib files. Historically, they were a little different. They're now XIB files because they use XML, but we still refer to them as nib files. I need to put out as my base object a UI collection view cell. So if I type in COLL, collection view, there's collection view cell, and drag it, there's my cell. I can drag its corner to make it bigger and smaller. Now, I don't actually have to match perfectly the cell size here and the cell size that it will be within the collection view. Now for layout, it's maybe nice to have them match up, but since I'm taking a label and I'm centering it vertically and horizontally, when this cell becomes a different size, it's still going to work for me. So I'm just going to pick something bigger than I need it to be, because this will work out just fine for me. And inside of this, I'm going to place my label. So I'm going to drag a label in, and then I'm going to control click drag from the label diagonally. And it's interesting, my trackpad is actually sticking. That's why that is happening. Control click drag diagonally, choose center vertically and horizontally. And we also had made our label before a little smaller, so we're going to make that 14 font size. And in order for us to get to the label out of the cell, just like we did before, with the label selected, we need to set a tag on it, which is 1 if we don't want to change our code. This cell is of type UI collection view cell. If I go to my view controller where we do this DQ reusable cell, we want it to be a UI collection view cell, so the typing is correct. I though need to register this cell to be available to us as a reusable cell. So up here in view did load, I am going to say CollectionView dot. Well, but I don't have a CollectionView object, do I, right now?
Nope.
So I'm going to have to give in and create an IB outlet for it for me to move on. So I'm going back to the storyboard, open up the assistant editor, and control click drag and create an outlet. And I'm just going to call this collection view. Connect. Turn the assistant editor off, back to my view controller, and now I can say collection view dot, and I need to register a nib as a cell with reuse identifier. It needs a nib, and so that is going to be a UI nib object, and I can do this by saying UI nib and then picking one of these initializers, and the one I want uses a string name for the nib. What did I call my nib?
HW cell.
So HW cell. And the bundle can be set to nil because I'm using the main bundle. And I need to specify a reuse identifier, and I already wrote my code to use cell as my reuse identifier, so can I do that? Well, no, I already have one registered as cell, right?
Right.
So let's call this HW cell lowercase. That's going to be my reuse identifier, which means down here in CollectionView DQ reusable cell, I need that to be HW cell. Can we go to the nib real quick, and just so we could see a difference, change the background color? Absolutely. So I'm going to select the CollectionView cell, and I'm going to make its background color, say, a light blue. Will that work for you?
Perfect.
So let's just double check here what is going on. We're taking the CollectionView object, which we have access to in ViewDidLoad because we created an IB outlet, and we called registered nib on it. We created an UI nib object telling it the nib name, and we specified a reuse identifier HW cell, so that down here in the cell for item at index path, we're going to dequeue it based on HW cell. It's cast as a UI collection view cell because that is in fact its type. And then as before, because we had a label in it with a tag of 1, we can find that label and set the text on it. Do you think it'll work?
Let's try it.
There we go. And by the way, We could change the number of sections from 1 to 2. And because of the way this code is written, it's going to create 2 sections and put the same 100 cells in both sections. So I'm going to do that. Simultaneously, I'm going to go back to my main storyboard, select the collection view, change the scroll direction back to vertical, but leave paging on. And here we have our paged 100 cells in the first section, and then there begins the second section. And that is a basic collection view. There are additional things you can do, like adding a header and a footer to it. We'll actually do that in another collection view video. And of course, the cells can be laid out to contain whatever you want them to contain. And in this example, it just happened to be a label that we set.